Welcome to History Unwound. You are with Kate.
And George. Today, the walls of 1,000 years break in a single morning, and an empire that outlived Rome itself comes to its end.
Welcome to History Unwound. I am Kate.
And I am George. This is the show where we take one moment from the past and stay with it long enough for the shape to come through.
Today, the end of the Roman Empire, not the one in the West. The one people forget kept going for 1,000 years after that. Constantinople, May 29th, 1453.
It's a date that doesn't get the weight it deserves. Schoolbook hand you 476 for the fall of Rome and move on as if the story ended there. But here is a city on the Bosphorus where men still called themselves Romans in Greek, still crowned emperors in purple, still ran as senates, still fought under eagles, for nearly 1,000 years after Rome fell.
And we almost never name them that way. We call them Byzantines, which is a word no Byzantine ever used for himself.
A label a German historian attached in the 16th century. They were Romaioi, Romans. To themselves, the empire never fell. It simply continued east.
So when we say 1453, we are not talking about the defeat of a Greek-speaking kingdom. We're talking about the last hour of an idea that had called itself Roman since the time of Augustus.
15 centuries. Think about that frame for a second. The man watching the breach in the wall that night traced his title, unbroken, back to the nephew of Julius Caesar.
I want to start with him, actually, because in most tellings, Constantine the Eleventh is a footnote. He's the guy at the end, but he is standing in a line that begins with Augustus and ends with a sword in his hand on a torn piece of ground at the St. Romanus Gate.
Constantine Paleologos, 50 years old, a soldier all his life, competent, unmarried, no heir, and he knew exactly what he was inheriting. An empire that had shrunk to a city.
That's the part that hits me. By 1453, the empire was the city. A few Aegean islands, a slice of the Peloponnesus, and these walls.
The walls are where this story has to begin. Because to understand why anyone thought Constantinople could hold out, you have to understand what had been built around it 1,000 years earlier.
The Theodosian walls.
Built under Theodosius II, completed around 413. A triple-layered defensive system running about 4 miles across the landward side of the peninsula. An outer wall, a main wall, a moat, and a raised terrace between them.
And what I didn't appreciate until I read the measurements is that it wasn't just thickness. It was geometry. Attackers had to cross the moat, climb the outer wall, cross a killing ground, and then face the great inner wall, which was 40 feet high with 96 towers.
Nothing like it existed anywhere in the medieval world. Not in China, not in Europe, not in the Islamic world. For 1,040 years, those walls were tried. And for 1,040 years, those walls held.
Attila the Hun, Avars, Persians, Arabs twice, Bulgars, Rus, even the Crusaders, who managed to sack the city in 1204, came in through the sea walls, not the Theodosian ones. On the landward side, nobody broke through.
That's a record you can't overstate. 1,000 years of failed sieges. When Mehmed arrived in 1453, those stones had stared down every empire between late antiquity and the Renaissance and watched each one retreat.
So if you are a Byzantine in April of 1453 looking out from the battlements, you are looking at the same stone your great-great-great-grandfather defended, and it worked for him. You have reason to think it will work for you.
You do. What you do not have is imagination for what is coming over the next ridge.
Which brings us to Mehmed.
Mehmed the Second, 21 years old.
That number does not get said enough. 21.
He had already been sultan once briefly as a child and been pushed aside. He came back to the throne in 1451 when his father died, and within weeks of taking power the second time, he had told his inner circle the plan.
Constantinople. He was going to take the city.
Every sultan before him had wanted it. Every sultan before him had failed or lost interest. Mehmed made it the entire project of his young reign.
And what I think people miss about him is he was not some raw warlord. He spoke Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. He read Caesar and Alexander. He saw himself self-consciously as the next Alexander. He wanted the city the way Alexander had wanted Persia.
He was also patient. He spent a winter of 1452 building a fortress, not at the city itself, up the Bosphorus at the narrowest point, maybe 5 miles north.
Rumile Hisari, the throat cutter.
Exactly. It meant that any ship coming down from the Black Sea, any Genoese grain ship, any Venetian relief fleet would pass under Ottoman guns before it ever reached the Golden Horn. He cut the supply line a full year before the siege began.
Constantine sent an embassy asking by what right Mehmed was building a fort on what had been imperial territory. Mehmed had the ambassadors beheaded.
That was the answer, and Constantine understood the answer.
There is a moment in the Greek sources where Constantine writes to the Pope, to Venice, to Genoa, to the Hungarians asking for help. And the responses come back, and they are what responses always are. Conditional, delayed, tied to theological concessions about the union of the churches.
The Catholic West wanted Constantinople to acknowledge papal supremacy before it sent troops, and the Orthodox population of the city would rather die Roman than pray Latin.
There is that famous line from one of the Byzantine officials. Better the Sultan's turban than the cardinal's hat.
A line that by the end of May, a lot of people must have regretted saying.
Now let's talk about the canon, because this is the piece of the story that actually changes history.
Orban,
A Hungarian engineer, offers his services first to Constantine. Constantine cannot pay him. So Orban walks across the Bosphorus and offers the same services to Mehmed.
and Mehmed pays him 4 times what he asked.
That detail kills me. 4 times what he asked. Because Mehmed knows what a cannon means, if it is big enough.
And it is big enough. The largest of Orban's bombards was roughly 27 feet long. It fired stone balls that weighed around 1,200 pounds.
60 oxen to pull it, 200 men to steady it on the road.
It took 3 hours to reload between shots. You could fire it maybe 7 times in a day. And the barrel itself, after about 6 weeks of firing, cracked.
But while it worked, it did something no weapon in history had done before. It broke the Theodosian walls.
Not all at once. Not cleanly, but for the first time in 1,000 years, stones that had stopped Attila were coming down under a kinetic force the builders could never have imagined.
I keep trying to picture what that sounded like inside the city. You've lived all your life hearing that the walls are the walls. Your grandmother told you they would hold. And now every few hours, something hits them with a sound like the sky splitting.
There are accounts of the noise being heard in villages 10 miles away. Ships at sea said they felt the concussion in their decks.
The defenders would patch the breach at night, pile in rubble, earth, timber, barrels full of wool to absorb impact, and the next morning the cannon would fire again and the patch would come apart.
It becomes a rhythm, a grinding, slow rhythm. The siege is not fast. It is 53 days.
53 days. I think that's another piece people miss. We say the walls fell and imagine one dramatic afternoon. It was almost 2 months of this.
April 6th to May 29th. Cannon by day, sapping and mining underground, assaults at the weak points, constant probing.
And the defenders, how many are we talking about?
Roughly 7,000 men against an Ottoman army of somewhere between 80 and 100,000.
More than 10 to 1. Against walls that were breaking.
And inside those 7,000, a meaningful portion were foreigners. Genoese, Venetians, a few Catalans. The commander of the land defense was a Genoese condottiere named Giovanni Giustiniani Longo.
Giustiniani is one of the figures in this story who I wish more people knew. He arrived in January of 1453 with 700 professional soldiers from Genoa at his own expense.
Constantine was so grateful he gave him command of the entire land wall. A foreigner in charge of the most important stretch of real estate in the Roman world.
And by all accounts, he was superb. He was the one organizing the night repairs. He was the one at every breach. He slept on the wall.
So you have Constantine walking the ramparts with him, the Emperor of Rome and a Genoese mercenary side by side, because there is no longer a distinction that matters.
The naval side of this is where the siege almost cracks for Mehmed.
The Golden Horn. That's the inlet of water that forms the northern harbor of Constantinople.
And it was closed. A massive iron chain floated on wooden pontoons, stretched across the mouth of the Horn from the city to the Genoese colony at Galata on the other side. Ottoman ships could not get in.
which meant the sea walls facing the Horn were, for most of the siege, likely defended. Because why would you need to defend them? No fleet could reach them.
Mehmed's answer to that chain is, I think, one of the most audacious pieces of military engineering in the entire medieval period.
He went around it, overland.
Say that again for anyone only half listening. He took warships, full warships, and he dragged them overland, over a hill for roughly a mile on greased logs, with teams of oxen, and launched them on the other side of the chain inside the Horn.
70 ships in one night.
The defenders woke up on April 22nd and saw an Ottoman fleet sitting inside their harbor, behind their chain, within bowshot of walls that nobody had been manning.
There is a line in one of the Greek chroniclers. He said it was as if the sea had been brought over the mountain by a wizard.
And suddenly the defenders have to stretch the same 7,000 men across a second front. The sea walls of the Horn now need manning too.
Which thins everybody. Which is the point.
By the middle of May, the pattern is set. Cannon is grinding down the walls at St. Romanus. Mines are being dug under the foundations and countermined by a German engineer named Johann Grant, who was either Scottish or German depending on which source you believe, fighting for the defenders.
Assaults at night. Skirmishes by day. The population of the city is praying in the churches and carrying icons along the walls.
There is a moment that gets reported in multiple sources. A procession carrying the Hagia, the most sacred icon in the city, supposedly painted by St. Luke. And the icon slips from the hands of the bearers and falls into the mud.
People screamed, fell to their knees, took it as an omen.
Because at that point, everyone is reading everything as an omen. The moon is eclipsed on the night of May 22nd. The next day, a strange fog settles over the city in weather that should not produce fog.
And that night, observers on the walls and inside Hagia Sophia report a light, some kind of glow. It seems to settle on the dome of the Hagia Sophia and then lift from it and move away to the east.
The Greeks interpreted that as the Holy Spirit abandoning the city.
And Mehmed's astrologers, watching the same light from outside the walls, interpreted it as a sign that God was now moving to the Ottoman camp.
Same event, opposite reading, and both sides believed it.
On May 28th, the cannon has done its work. The wall of the St. Romanus sector, the Mesopotamian, is essentially a ruin with a rubble palisade across the gap. Everyone in the city knows the assault is coming that night.
Mehmed announces it openly. The final attack will begin after midnight on May 29th. 3 days of pillage are promised to anyone who gets inside.
And inside the city, on that last evening, something extraordinary happens.
The liturgy and Hagia Sophia.
This is the piece of the story I cannot read without going quiet. For decades, the Orthodox and Catholic populations of the city had refused to worship together. They considered each other heretical. There were Catholics in the city, Venetians and Genoese. They had their own churches. They did not attend Greek services. The Greeks did not attend theirs.
But on May 28th, 1453, with the assault coming at midnight, both communities walked into Hagia Sophia together.
Constantine the 11th was there. Giustiniani was there. Orthodox clergy, Catholic clergy, Venetian sailors, Genoese soldiers, Greek townspeople, men who had refused to share communion for generations. They stood in that building together and prayed.
And Hagia Sophia, remember, was then almost 1,000 years old. Built by Justinian in 537, the largest interior space in the Christian world, that dome.
Lit by thousands of candles. All of them the last congregation to worship there as a church, in an empire that had called itself Roman since Caesar, singing the final liturgy of the Christian Roman Empire.
Constantine, according to the sources, then went around the church, asking forgiveness of everyone he had ever wronged. Then he rode out to the walls.
You would not come back through those doors.
He rode to the Mesopotamian, to the breach, to be with Justiniani, and somewhere around 1 in the morning, Mehmed's army began to move.
The first wave was the Bashibazouks, irregulars, unarmored, lightly armed, essentially expendable.
Mehmed used them deliberately. to tire the defenders, to soak up crossbow bolts and arrows. They were slaughtered by the thousand.
And they were replaced by the Anatolian regulars, better armed, better trained. Another 2 hours of grinding assault. The defenders held
And then Mehmed sent in the Janissaries.
his elite, his personal corps, Christian-born boys, taken as children under the Devshirme system, raised as Muslim soldiers, trained their entire lives for a moment like this one. About 10,000 of them.
By this point, Justiniani has been on the wall, in armor, fighting, for probably 6 hours. The defenders around him have been fighting longer.
And then Justiniani is hit.
The exact wound is debated in the sources. Some say a crossbow bolt through his armpit, where the plate did not cover. Some say a handgun shot. Some say cannon fragment. What they all agree is that it was serious and that he was bleeding badly.
And he asked to be taken off the wall.
Constantine begged him to stay. There are accounts of the emperor, armor and alm, pleading with him to stay on the line, because the Genoese soldiers under Justiniani's command would follow their commander off the wall if he left.
Justiniani left anyway. He was carried down through the inner wall toward the harbor to be put on a Genoese ship. And exactly what Constantine feared happened. His men went with him.
The center of the defense, at the most broken part of the wall, emptied out.
And then the Kerkoporta.
This detail haunts me.
The Kerkoporta is a small sandy port in a section of the wall some distance from the main breach, a postern gate used by defenders making small counterattacks. And that night, someone on the way back inside failed to bar it properly.
It was left ajar.
A small group of Janissaries, maybe 50 men, found it open. They went through, climbed the inner wall, and raised their flag on the battlements above.
And the defenders on the main wall, looking over their shoulders, saw Ottoman colors flying behind them. In their own city, above their own rampart.
And the word goes up. The city is taken.
It was not taken. Not yet. A 50-man incursion is not a breach. But the cry goes up anyway, and panic does what panic does.
Constantine is on the wall when he hears it. He looks back and sees the flag behind him.
And he does the only thing I think that his ancestors would have recognized as the correct thing. He took off his imperial insignia. The purple, the eagles, the markers that made him the emperor. And he charged into the breach with the remaining defenders.
His body was never positively identified.
They found dead in imperial boots. Allegedly, they found a body they thought might have been his, but no confirmed corpse of the last Roman emperor was ever produced.
Which is how he becomes legend. How the marble emperor stories start, the one who sleeps under the city and will return when the Romans are ready to take it back.
He was 50 years old. He reigned 4 years and 3 months. He is the last person in a line that began with Augustus in 27 BC.
The assault breaks through in the hours just before dawn. Janissaries pour in. The Ottoman army is in the streets. The sack begins.
Mehmed had promised 3 days of pillage. His men took it.
The population had mostly fled into the churches, Hagia Sophia especially. The tradition was that if the Turks ever entered the city, an angel would descend from heaven at the door of Hagia Sophia and drive them out.
The angel did not come.
The doors of Hagia Sophia were broken in around sunrise on May 29th. Everyone inside, clergy in mid-liturgy, was taken. The city fell.
But there is a moment later that day that I think is the one to close on, because it tells you something about Mehmed and something about what he thought he had just done.
He rode to Hagia Sophia.
He dismounted outside, this 21-year-old sultan who had just taken the greatest prize in the medieval world. And he bent down and picked up a handful of dust, and he scattered it on his turban.
A gesture of humility. Before the building, before the history, before God. He said, according to the Ottoman sources, a line about the spider weaving its curtains in the palace of the Caesars and the owl calling the watches in the towers of Afrasiab.
Persian poetry, a reflection on the passing of empires, quoted by the man who had just ended one.
He did not destroy the Hagia Sophia. He converted it. The next Friday, prayers were held inside it as a mosque, and it stood as a mosque for almost 500 years.
He also did not destroy the Greek population. He gave them a patriarch. He preserved their church structure under Ottoman rule. Constantinople became Istanbul, but it did not become empty. The people stayed. The city continued.
What did leave were the books.
The manuscripts.
Greek scholars had been trickling west for decades before the fall. After the fall, the trickle became a flood. They carried with them the libraries of Constantinople, Plato, Aristotle, Herodotus, Thucydides, Ptolemy, works that the Latin West had forgotten or knew only through Arabic translation.
And those manuscripts arrived in Florence and Venice and Rome exactly when a generation of Italian scholars was ready to read them.
The Renaissance does not happen the way it happens without 1453. Cosimo de' Medici is funding Greek scholars in Florence specifically because these men are arriving from the East with books nobody in Italy has seen in centuries.
So in one of the strangest inversions in history, the fall of the last Greek city and the end of the Roman Empire is the thing that hands Plato back to Europe.
The body of the empire dies. The mind of it scatters west and takes root.
I think that's the frame I want to leave with. 1453 is not only an ending, it is the moment when 1500 years of Greek learning that had survived inside those walls because those walls held finally got out.
And walked west into a world that was ready for it.
And Constantine, somewhere in the rubble of the St. Romanus Gate, under a heap of armor nobody could sort out, stayed behind.
One last Roman fighting his way forward, not backward, at the end.
Next time on History Unwound, we go back almost 1500 years and up a cliff in the Judean desert. A Roman legion at the base. 960 Jewish rebels at the top. A fortress that should have been impossible to take.
Masada, 73 AD, 7 months of siege. A ramp of earth built against a mountain. And on the last night, before the Romans broke through, the defenders made a choice that is still argued about 2,000 years later.
That is episode 4 of History Unwound. Subscribe so you catch it when it drops.
Well, if tonight moved you, give us a like and leave us a comment about what you thought. It helps us more than you know.
I am Kate.
I am George.
This was History Unwound. Stay curious. If this one stayed with you, follow the show. That's how more people find us.
Next week, on History Unwound, a Judean mountaintop, a Roman siege ramp, and 900 people who chose their own ending. Masada.
I am Kate.
I am George.
This was History Unwound. Stay curious.